Hello, my name's Kelly Gardiner, and I'm here with Sharmini Kumar and Kylie Mirmohamadi, and we're very happy to be here and virtual Jane Con this year. I wanted to acknowledge before I start that we are all of us talking on coming to you from stolen land in Australia. I'm on Wurundjeri country here. I think we're all on Wurundjeri country, and we'd like to acknowledge that country never ceded, and it has the most incredible long tradition of storytelling and caring for country, um, and that's always important for us to acknowledge in everything that we do, but particularly when we're speaking to people from anywhere in the world. That's where we're from. Um, So, I wanted to start by talking about accomplished women. According to Miss Caroline Bingley in Pride and Prejudice, as I'm sure you all know, a woman must have a thorough knowledge of music, singing, drawing, dancing, and the modern languages to deserve the word. And besides all this, I'm trying to do her chin there. Besides all this, she must possess a certain something in her air and manner of walking, the tone of her voice, her address and expressions, or the word will be but half deserved. All this she must possess, added Darcy, and to all this she must yet add something more substantial in the improvement of her mind by extensive reading. That is Caroline Bingley and Darcy's view of what an accomplished woman might be. And then, of course, there's Mary Bennet. And the zenith of her story in Pride and Prejudice is hearing herself mentioned to Miss Bingley as the most accomplished girl in the neighbourhood, although we do not learn what Miss Bingley thought about that assertion. Probably just as well.
Yeah. I
We can
was going to say we
probably
can
imagine.
guess. Yeah.
We can imagine. Hopefully, Mary doesn't know. So Austen is teasing here, and it's as much a comment on class as it is on education as such. Miss Bingley had an education denied to Mary Bennet, and for that matter, denied to Jane Austen. She had been educated in one of the first private seminaries in town, we are told, where all the accomplishments she's mentioned would have been learned. But Austen's own family valued education and reading and a range of accomplishments. Um, and she and Cassandra were sent to schools in Oxford and Southampton and later Reading, although only briefly. Most of their education happened at home and with access to their father's library, which allowed them to improve their minds by extensive reading. Um, but this statement that she puts in Miss Bingley's voice is also ironic because, of course, Jane Austen was very aware of women authors like her, celebrated contemporaries like Fanny Burney and Maria Edgeworth, poets like Mary Robinson and Charlotte Smith, and the great historian, Catherine Macaulay. They were intellectually and genuinely accomplished women, including the group often derided as blue stockings. But Austen, of course, also created characters who are readers, who are musicians, who are managers of estates and households, elegant, practical, competent, intelligent women, even the ones that we don't like very much. And um, that legacy of her character development, her well-rounded character development, is most evident really in her women who become almost real to us and through whom many of us see ourselves, our possibilities, or impossibilities, and the world. So I wanted to focus for a little bit on some of the characters or the key characters that appealed to me in Austen and the sort of character types that she created. It's just an example of character types that she created that I think have become almost archetypal in literature. They're so significant that when we write, we are in danger of unconsciously recreating them, or we can play with them. We can consciously revisit them or reimagine them, as Sharmini and I have done with Miss Bingley. We can turn them on their heads. We can put them into a new world, and um, in in an ironic sense, I suppose, like in Clueless, um, and have fun with them. Perhaps more fun than they might have had in their own lives. Um, Austen, of course, was not the first person to try and create memorable female characters, and people who read her initially were very familiar with everyone from Lady Macbeth to um, Fanny Burney's characters. But at that time, when she and Burney in particular were writing, there had been some of the most popular novels, which she, of course, sends up um, in Northanger Abbey, were melodramatic and sometimes extremely lengthy tales of young women whose main characteristics were virtue, or, well, actually just virtue, um, and feminine virtue at that. But more relevant to our discussion today are the heroines of books like those written by Fanny Burney, which we know that Miss Austen read and enjoyed, and who also had a bitingly satirical pen. Um, and other people, scholars, have noted the influence of Evelina, or particularly Cecilia, I think, on Pride and Prejudice. Burney's women are often not bothered by the sort of financial constraints faced by the Dashwood sisters or the Bennet sisters. They're usually a lot more well off, but they are virtuous, as of course young ladies had to be. But the novels are very witty, and the young women are trying to find their way in the world. So there were interesting young women um, having adventures of different kinds in literature at that time. And there were also novels in which um, virtuous young women, or boring young women, in fact, had interesting things happen to them. Um, so what we're seeing at this time is a whole lot of women who are incredibly accomplished, creating books and creating poems and pieces of music and portraits and all sorts of things that were creating a new sense of what women could be in the world, and often, as in the case of Lizzie Bennet, of course, more rebellious. In lots of ways, and willing to stick up for herself and stick up for people she loves than some of the young women that had been seen before, whose main attribute, as I said, was virtue. But then there is this other character type that I'm not sure it was perfected later in the 19th century, but I think I have a feeling that she helped kick it off with Miss Caroline Bingley, and it's we call it now the female gentleman, and to sort of trace its development, we can go back to Mary Wollstonecraft pleading for this idea of androgyny, of combining the elements of what she saw, of course, in the sort of binary way that they all saw the world, um, of women being able to, what she said, imitate manly virtues. Um, the exercise of which ennobles the human character. So feminist scholars recently have identified this figure as the female gentleman, which came later in sort of sensation and detective novels, and then well into the 20th century. Um, and the idea is that it's taking that 19th century idea that of those manly virtues that somehow got themselves inside what was a female body. Extraordinary idea, right? So the idea is that there's a woman who is competent and courageous and self-reliant in practical situations and capable of dealing with a whole lot of stuff and being rational and sensible and reading and having arguments and being curious and so on, and yet is a woman. So um, Louisa May Alcott actually described herself in this way, that she said she had the soul of a man inside a woman's body, and recreated that idea in Jo March. And Sherlock Holmes says something similar about Irene Adler. He says she has a soul of steel. She has the face of the most beautiful of women and the mind of the most resolute of men. So these characters are talented, rational, intellectual, perhaps even brilliant. The only woman that defeated Sherlock Holmes. But they are women. How could that be? There must be only one explanation, and that is the manly virtues in a woman's body. Totally, of course, discounting all these other women who were doing all these things, or the idea, the reality of these accomplished, genuinely accomplished intellectual women at the time. And when we see people now talking about strong female characters, I think it's connected to that idea. Um, and you see that all the time in fantasy and girl detectives and um, well, anybody who's able to say boo to a goose, really. So I classify Caroline Bingley as a female gentleman, along with her many failings. She is clever and perceptive. She is accomplished and distinguished and rational and scathingly witty. She is absolutely terrible at flirting. We do know that. And she is a snob, but so was her contemporary, Anne Lister. And so were many people of her class, including Darcy. So we just have to get over that. Or not get over it, but just see it for what it is. Um, so when Sharmini and I asked ourselves would Caroline Bingley do after Darcy married Eliza Bennet, we thought that she would take a good hard look at herself and her what she had thought were accomplishments and decide to expand them, to re-educate herself in things about which women were not meant to be curious. That she would travel, she would read philosophy, she would be interested in natural history, the ancient world, and eventually, of course, solving crime, which is where we took her. Um, so we're going to now talk a bit more about Mary Bennet, and and then Sharmini's going to come and talk a bit more about different portrayals of Caroline Bingley on the
Thanks,
screen.
Kel. Okay. Hi, I'm Kylie Mirmohamadi. I'm the author of The Digital Afterlives of Jane Austen, which is a book about Jane Austen fan fiction, and also more recently a chapter on depictions in novels of Mary Bennet in this slim volume, the Routledge Companion to Jane Austen. I've just had a few observations to make about the connections between Caroline and Mary, which I think is one of the very interesting connection between both of them is that neither of them are particularly loved by their author or by their narrator. So we have Mr. Bennet, of course, bunching her in as one of the silly sisters, and we have the narrator describing Jane and Eliza Bennet as the most worthy sisters. And even in the 1894 Peacock edition, which I'm sure a lot of people will be familiar with, in the preface, George Saintsbury commented on Mary's unbelovedness by Austen, that she didn't really take much, didn't really take many pains with her, except perhaps to be unkind to her. But incidentally, he also thought that Austen, it would have been nice if Mary and Mr. Collins had ended up married. He says that would have been a notable mating, which I think is a strange way of saying it, but there we are. don't go into your too
I
much
don't want
about
to.
the
I'm
notable
going to
mating.
see that now.
And also would, of course, would have solved Mrs. Bennet's angst about the entail. So anyway, we have these minor characters who are unloved by their narrator, by their author, perhaps by many readers, and giving them a life outside those original parameters of the narrative of the novel, I think is it's some people call this a minor character elaboration, and it's all to do with the politics of characterization, which is and it can mean politics in the more narrow sense that we would mean it in terms of yes, you know, people over characters overlooked by their race because of their race or because of their class or because of their gender. But there is also a general politics of characterization going on here, in that there are not every character in a novel is a major character, and these are minor characters. But the novels that I was looking at that really were about giving Mary a different life. Um, there was a very strong trope of transformation in them. She was given a she's on a trajectory to feminist enlightenment a lot, and which involves a lot of reading, a little bit like uh, uh, Caroline and her reading. She's often given a makeover, like a physical makeover, and so she becomes more attractive, which has made me think, where is the makeover trope in television? It's something that's missing. No, no, maybe reality TV is taking that pace. I don't know. But Mary gets a lot of makeovers in these novels. She gets intellectual makeovers. She becomes a good reader, an accomplished reader, as opposed to her reading being something that is a little ridiculous about her, the way that she's always extracting and then making moral extractions from her reading. One of the main ways, or common ways, in which her rehabilitation is achieved in these novels and she is transformed is we get to revisit the famous scene at Netherfield Ball when she's performing. And even though not every novel gives her a triumphant performance in that scene, I think what we're given is the chance to feel sympathy for her, and I think that's keying into the rehabilitative role of minor character elaboration writings. I think what people do with Mary and what people do with many characters, including Caroline in your wonderful novel, um, is it's part of this general desire that we have. And as someone who has studied fan fiction, very familiar desire, I see this desire all the time. People want more Austen, they want more of her, they want more from her. And it's it's desire in many senses because it's unattainable. We can't go back and have more Austen, and we also can never it never ends. The constant elaboration of her work is a constant deferral of desire because we can never achieve it. Um, I read an article quite recently on Jane Austen fan fiction that calls it an endless tease, and I think that's a really good way of thinking about it. She says the game can constantly be reset and replayed again. So maybe that's something about the way that entertainment and video games and many things in the digital world do have that constant potential to you get a do-over. You can play it again.
Mm.
So yeah, that's my thoughts about Mary and Caroline. So
What
um,
would what are your favorite kind of where to take Mary next?
I I like it when I like it when Mary gets her intellectual satisfaction and she gets her library, and but I also kind of like it when Mary is paired up with a romantic partner and given like a good sex life and a good and a good uh, s- that sense of I have to say, even in the original, I have accidental empathy activated often for Mary with her aspirations to for intellectual her intellectual pretensions, her earnestness, her always wanting to like you to say something as as her father cruelly as the narrator like cruelly comments on it. She wants to say something clever. She wants and I often want to say something clever. So yeah, so if she's happy, if she's intellectually fulfilled, if she's sexually fulfilled, if she's I mean all these things make me happy
That's
when
great.
in
Yeah.
Mary's life outside the novel.
And out from under her parents' roof,
Yes, yeah, yeah,
importantly.
yeah. And
Yeah.
the cruelty that her father that, visits upon her, I feel it strongly with her because I feel like she cares a bit more.
Mm.
That
Yeah.
yeah, there's a lot at stake for her because she's not beautiful and she's not clever and maybe it's something to do with the sibling relationship too. Like anyone who has been compared to their siblings, they're compared to their sisters. It's an uncomfortable position to be in sometimes. So yeah.
Mm.
The
Are
other
there
thing
particular?
about sorry, go on.
I was going to ask if Kylie had any particular recommendations for people to watch or read.
Really? No, no. I think there's a number of novels. I mean, people can search for the novels about Mary Bennet. There are a number of them. I like to read them as not just because I think about them as a group. I like to read these novels as a group and to see like the different ways in which she's taken. There's not like one that or that I think is like the way that it should have been or yeah.
One of the things about Mary, though, is that she's one of the few characters who does not drive the plot at all.
No,
Mm.
no. Mm.
Um,
Extraneous again.
yeah. So
Yeah,
just giving the
yeah,
act of giving her
mm,
agency.
yeah, yeah. I think that's what the preface of the 1894 Peacock edition was. He was getting at. She does. Yeah, not much pains has been taken with her, even even like to give her like she could give a little push along for the plot. Yes.
We're getting a Mary mini series, aren't we? The
Are
other
we?
Bennett sister.
Yeah, we are.
Oh yes, yeah,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah. So it'll be interesting to see where they go with that. Yeah.
Hmm.
Mm. Thanks, Kylie. Anything else you wanted to add?
No, I don't think so. Is any
Okay.
let's go on to Caroline again.
Sure.
Speaking of Caroline not being beloved and
Speaking
not,
of
not very
Caroline,
beloved of some adaptation makers either.
yes, well, this is true. I'm going to get just share. Uh, see what happens if I click on that. Okay, Caroline on screen. So my name's Sharmini Kumar. I have written together with Kelly, Miss Caroline Bingley, private investigator slash private detective, depending on what part of the world you're in. And so therefore I have watched a lot of Caroline Bingley on screen. And so that's what I'm going to talk about. And of course, Anna Chancellor is on the front because that's where she should be. We love Anna Chancellor. I kind of wanted to talk about what it means to adapt this. The Pride and Prejudice cover that you see there is a cover that they've put just on the front of the regular text of Pride and Prejudice, and I'm not sure what you would expect seeing that cover and what you would get opening it up. Um, but anyway, Pride and Prejudice, an adaptation. The adaptation, the famous movie about how impossible it is to faithfully adapt books into films because a book gives us so many options to imagine the way that somebody says something, the tone of voice and the kind of intention behind things, if it's not explicit. Whereas every time you make an adaptation, you do an adaptation, you have to make a choice about all of those things. You have to make a choice about how bitchy Caroline is versus how kind of how much she doesn't care, or how vicious she is versus how much she's genuinely trying to look out for Elizabeth's social future, if you believe that that could be something she's interested in. So every time somebody creates this character, even if they are using the exact words of Austen, they're making choices, and they're making decisions about who they think she is, and kind of making a backstory for themselves. That's the process of acting, is to kind of create a backstory and use that to inform your performance. So I kind of just wanted to set that up as the background for what I'm going to be talking about, which is the different ways that different screen adaptations of Pride and Prejudice have portrayed Caroline. This is by no means an exhaustive list. They're just the ones that came to my mind. That's all. That's what they have in common. But first, I wanted to start by thinking about what function Caroline serves in the story. And we have this lovely graphic over here. If you're not Mr. Darcy or a relative, I hate you. Which probably fair, right? And probably she also hates some of her relatives, I'm sure. So she's glamorous, wealthy, strategic, ambitious, well-educated, conniving, critical, sly, petty, awful at flirting with Darcy. So I'm glad that somebody other than Kelly and I has recognized that. But in terms of the actual story, why do we need to have a Caroline Bingley in there? One is obviously because she's a great character, but that's not really a story function. I mean, it's good enough for Mary, I guess, who doesn't do anything to progress the plot. But Caroline's a bit of an antagonist in the first half of the story, somebody for Elizabeth particularly to push back against, and who is, I don't know how seriously we're expected to take her as a romantic rival for Darcy's affections. He definitely doesn't seem particularly interested in her, even though they're of a similar kind of friend group and social class or whatever. But kind of an antagonist to, at the very least, annoy Elizabeth. But also to serve kind of as a comparison to Darcy and Elizabeth, who both have that arc of, I mean, you can see one of them as Pride and the other as Prejudice, or both of them having elements of both Pride and Prejudice. But their arc over the story of the novel is really that they kind of move past those things or grow through those things, and not to fully get rid of all their Pride and Prejudice, but to kind of have their eyes opened a little bit, to have some more self-awareness, to have some more awareness of the world and what's going on, and through that to grow. Whereas Caroline in the novel doesn't get that. So she has these opportunities to learn. She certainly has pride, she certainly has prejudice, but she doesn't get an arc in the novel where she gets to move past those things, to sort of, I guess, reap the rewards of having a broader worldview, which in the novel seems to be marriage to somebody with 10,000 a year, which is worthwhile. So just kind of thinking about that while I'm looking at some of these adaptations. And I'm starting not at the very beginning, but very early on, the very un-Regency Pride and Prejudice with these fluffy gowns. Greer Garson and Laurence Olivier in the famous archery scene, which Jane Austen wrote nothing about. And Caroline Bingley basically is just there to be grumpy. She comes in and Elizabeth's having fun and teasing Mr. Darcy. And Mr. Darcy says, "What do you think?" And Caroline says, "Smiling too much is bad." Having fun too much is bad. And that's her. She's like angry, annoyed, against them. She's barely set up as an antagonist. She's just kind of there to be grumpy and I guess a kind of comparison to Elizabeth. I only include this because I think this is a fabulous gown, and because even though it has nothing to do with the Regency, also because this adaptation plays with some of the stuff in the novel insofar as it has, late spoiler alert, Lady Catherine at the end saying to Darcy, actually, I quite like Elizabeth and I think you'd be a good match. So it's a piece that's quite prepared to play with some of the kind of straight readings of the text, but not for Caroline. She's just grumpy and miserable, but in a fabulous gown. So, you know, what are we going to do?
I just keep thinking what our friend Hilary Davidson would think of.
Oh,
I think we know what Hillary
we
thinks
know
about
what Hillary thinks. Hilary Davidson is a dress historian who's done a lot of work around Jane Austen and the Regency, and would tell you this is not era appropriate, even though they do talk about things like Waterloo. And you're like, yeah, no, this is not Waterloo adjacent costuming. Yes, I had to watch it again recently. It was homework. P and Z, I guess if you're American, Pride and Prejudice and Zombies, also kind of just has Caroline as a kind of bitchy antagonist. Only appears for like one scene really, in which she thinks herself better than Elizabeth because she has studied martial arts in Japan as opposed to in China. Uh, but sadly, we never get to see her do any martial arts. So she's a talker, but she's not actually a zombie slayer in this movie. I actually kind of think she would be quite good at killing zombies.
I'm totally going to give her a sword fight at some point.
Yes, but are we going to give her zombies?
No, because
Okay.
they scare me.
Fair enough. Um, fair enough. Anyway, that is all that Caroline gets to be in Pride and Prejudice and Zombies. But it is a fun movie if you're not too scared of zombies. Bride and Prejudice is well, it's there were choices made. Um, the Caroline character, who I think is called Kiran in this movie, is played by the fabulous Indira Varma. And it's quite a complex role in some ways, even though this is not a super deep film. She is of Indian background, but living in the UK, comes back with her brother, the Bingley character, to India, and her brother's into all the Indian traditions, the Bollywood dancing, the singing, the rituals, and the Caroline character is the one that's like, these traditions are weird, even though they're her tradition. Well, you could there would be a way that you could see them as her traditions as well. So her way of flirting with Darcy is actually to be like, aren't all these traditions weird? This is what's going on and it's all a bit weird and I'm above it, so you're allowed to be above it too, which is a really interesting kind of positioning, which I'm not gonna explore too much here. And you, yes, she also does play the classic kind of trying to flirt with Darcy, the classic "can you put sunscreen on my back" scene. Um, that I don't know if that has ever worked for anybody in the flirting sense. But she definitely tries it, and obviously she doesn't work. It doesn't work for her. And the caption you can see there is, "Oh my gosh, Elizabeth Bennet, the Lizzie character, you're reading a book on holidays. How terrible! You know how kind of blue stockingy, boringly kind of whatever are you?" So she has this interesting position at the beginning of the film, particularly in regards to the way that class is represented on a global scale in this film. Sadly, I hope it was just that it was edited out. I'm assuming it was just edited out because they didn't have enough time. She doesn't really get an arc to kind of explore her own relationship to India and those traditions and her own pride and her own prejudices in that sense. She just turns up at the very end and points the Elizabeth Bennet character in the direction of Mr. Darcy, who is Darcy in this, who's just standing there having kind of playing an Indian drum and wearing Indian kind of traditional clothing. So we're supposed to believe that she's kind of come around, I guess, or that there was no other way, I guess, for the filmmaker to have that reveal. But I kind of like to imagine that there's something going on in there that we haven't been given access to, which is her arc of self-awareness and self-realization and all of that stuff that she doesn't get in many other adaptations. Pride and Prejudice, fun movie, random mariachi band right in the middle of it. Okay, the classic. I feel like you can kind of basically tell how old somebody is by which Pride and Prejudice film adaptation they think is the better one. And I mean, the BBC miniseries will always have a place in my heart, partly because it gives Caroline, it does, because there's so much of the novel is included, there's so much Caroline in it, played again by the fabulous Anna Chancellor, who Kelly almost met but didn't quite.
And her headgear.
And her headgear, all the headgear, yes, is definitely a part of Caroline's character. So the wonderful thing about this is we get to see Caroline try multiple times to flirt with Darcy. She tries to flirt with Darcy by dissing Elizabeth, even though she knows that Darcy is kind of into her, and you're like, that's just a bad idea, right? She tries to flirt with him, by the comment about the fine eyes, and of course she's undercut when it actually turns out not to be her fine eyes, but Elizabeth Bennet's fine eyes. She also does get the wonderful little scene where she tries to warn Elizabeth that Wickham is no good. She doesn't know why, and she hasn't heard the whole story about Georgiana, but she does say, I've heard, there's a vibe about him, and he's not a good person, and you should stay away. Now, if she really was only about taking Darcy off Elizabeth, then you would think that she doesn't want to warn Elizabeth away from Wickham, right? But there's something about her that says, I have to say this. I have to say this out loud. I should say Indira Varma gets that same moment in Bride and Prejudice as well, to try and warn them off the Wickham character. So we do get to see a broader spectrum of Caroline Bingley-ness than we do in lots of other adaptations where she's just kind of relegated to, one scene of being horrible. But there are definite choices that have been made in this adaptation, which are very much to go along with the voice of the narrator in the novel in terms of how the narrator sees these characters. So where the narrator in the book, Pride and Prejudice, sees Mary as, sort of faux accomplished and quite silly, and that adaptation kind of goes with that. And this sees Caroline as purely ambitious and purely grasping and bitchy and snobby, and it kind of goes with that. It doesn't give us any layers to that character, which could have been found and have been found in other adaptations, particularly in Pride and Prejudice 2005, where Caroline was played by the stunning Kelly Riley, but she gets hardly anything. She comes to the ball. She's wearing very daring kind of off the shoulder, sleeveless dresses, and she quips about how rustic it all is, and that's pretty much it. But this is the adaptation that is famous for giving us a very sympathetic portrayal of Charlotte, a very sympathetic portrayal of Mrs. Bennet. But what we don't get is any, even a reasonably sympathetic portrait, I would think, of Mary. Would you say, Kylie? In that version, where she does seem to have a little bit more feeling to her. She does maybe seem to have a little bit of a feeling towards Mr. Collins, actually, who also in this version is portrayed if not fully sympathetically, at least as having kind of some deeper feelings than what you get in other adaptations. He's not just
Slightly more pains taken with him.
right. Some
Yeah.
slightly more pain is taken, but not for Caroline. Not for Caroline. Why not for Caroline? And that was the question that I have asked myself. Why hasn't she been taken as seriously as some of these other kind of villain characters, or on the page can be quite uh, maybe not two-dimensional, but not as fully rounded. Why hasn't she been taken seriously? I think one of the reasons for that is that there's a lot of um, the way that we often read Pride and Prejudice is to read ourselves as uh, most like Lizzie Bennet, to put ourselves in the position of that heroine who doesn't want to be feisty and spunky and, stand up to the bully who turns out to be your one true love, who also can change and has 10,000 a year, and Pemberley, who doesn't want that kind of, I don't know, Cinderella story, if you like. And then that kind of the psychology of that then puts Caroline Bingley as every mean person who's ever stood in your way, kind of thing. I would be interested if either of you had any other thoughts. But I think she's a fun villain, and so I think it's easy to push her into that villain role and keep her in that villain role, especially the more we identify with or want to identify with Lizzie.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. Like there's the the plot has to be resolved in the way that we want it to be resolved, and she is the thing standing in the way. So yeah, I do agree with that reading.
Well, the other thing that she does is hurt Jane, and
Yes.
nobody hurts lovely
Nobody hurts
Jane
Jane. No,
Mm.
on
no,
our
yeah,
watch.
not on
So
our watch. Yeah.
yeah.
The nicest,
So
sweetest, most beautiful character who's named after the author.
but although they do take a lot in the Kelly Riley portrayal, she loses. She also, partly because it's a movie, she loses a whole lot of subplot as well. So she doesn't get a chance to do very much. She does get to be brilliantly snobby in you know, the accomplishment scene.
She does, yes. Yes. She
And
absolutely.
it's a great performance, but then after that, she's not there.
You barely get her at
Yeah.
all. Um, yeah, you don't get her coming back into the story at that later point, which is a bit of a shame. But yes, it's a movie rather than the mini series, which doesn't have that luxury of time, I guess.
There's as Kelly's um, comments before show, there's enough of her, there enough a substance of her, and enough things that we can admire in her, even if we admire her in a jealous way, to allow her to step out
Yeah,
step out of these narrative parameters, these narrative confines, and do other things. So the fact that you and Kelly could have such a successful re-emergence of of her as a detective is a testament to you, but also testament to the things that were put into her in the original novel.
Yeah. And I think the same with Mary. Well, a slightly different thing about Mary, but she's, in a way, we have an emotional connection to her because we all know what that's like to be trying too hard and shy and
Mm.
not and having these other people in your family who are
Yeah, yeah.
extraordinary, or other people valuing them more highly. And in another sense, she's like a blank canvas that people can do a whole lot with because
Mm.
there's not much of her on the page.
That's
And
right. And she
so,
also doesn't have the load of emotional history and attachment from multiple readings, from multiple representations of such as Lizzie. In To me, here's a very highbrow connection. The relationship between Lizzie and Mary seems a little bit of, it's all Marsha, Marsha, Marsha.
Actually, yeah. I mean,
See,
Mary's the middle sister.
yes, yes. I was the middle sister, so I get the Marsha,
Ah,
Marsha.
here we go. Jan. Poor Jan.
I know. Yeah. Um, yeah, I don't have anything else to say except to say that we like to think we've taken Caroline Bingley quite seriously in what we've done. And hope you enjoy that and hope it sparks off some more thoughts about Caroline and about some of um, their side characters and where they could go. Did either of you have anything else you wanted to say before we wrap up?
Not from me.
No, just that it's a whole lot of fun as well.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
That's why we do this, isn't it? Just because it's fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You've got a whole lot of room to move
Yeah,
and something brilliant to start that you didn't have to think
absolutely.
of.
Yeah, that's right.
Because a
Jane
genius
Austen,
thought it up.
Jane Austen thought of it first, and we're just kind of
Yeah.
playing in her sandbox. So we would love to hear what you think in the YouTube comments, which we will definitely read and reply to. We'd love to hear your thoughts about adaptations and Mary and Caroline and everything like that. We want to thank the organizers of Virtual JaneCon. Thank you so much for keeping on doing this. It's a massive amount of effort and it brings people together from around the world with all levels of interest and different types of interest in Jane Austen. We just think that's fabulous. So thank you so much and thank you for joining in. And we hope to see you online or in person sometime soon.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Have a great virtual JaneCon.